Let's continue on with this beautiful commandment, and I kind of painted a bleak picture there, but I'm going to turn it around and we're going to talk about the greatness of this commandment and how this commandment is about raising great families. This fourth commandment, it offers freedom to our children. Freedom in their lives now and freedom in their futures. It offers God's wisdom. Because if they learn to respect and honor their parents, and parents are honoring and respecting their relationship with God, it leads these children into a relationship with God. And they can tap into that wisdom, and it sets for a good future for them, and the wisdom, the divine wisdom of God instead of the wisdom of the world. And it establishes the foundation not just for great dynamics within the family and a great future for individuals, but for a great society. And so we're going to look at the beauty of this commandment in the second half. The Catechism points out the greatness of this commandment in paragraph 2207, which says, authority, stability, and a life of relationships within the family constitutes the foundation for freedom, security, and fraternity within society. The family is the community in which, from childhood, one can learn moral values, begin to honor God, and make the good use of freedom. Family life is an initiation into life in society. The building block of society is the family. And as families learn to honor and respect one another and honor and respect their Creator, these families come together and they form great communities that honor and respect one another and get along, and they work together towards causes and great events. And these communities come together and they create great cities, working together and honoring one another. And these cities, working together collectively, set the foundation for a great nation. And as the nations of the world honor and respect one another, we have a great world. The foundation for all of this greatness starts in the family. And this commandment gives us so much to be able to start with and to build that foundation. And we shouldn't be looking for the government to fix these problems or the schools to fix these problems. It starts with us. It starts with us in God's beautiful commandments. And this one here, establishing honor and respect in the family through our love and through our examples. Would you say that maybe we need a little more honor and respect in our world today? It starts with each of us doing our own part. Each of us planting the seeds within our families. We can create a promising future. We can establish for our children and grandchildren a long life in the land the Lord our God is giving to us and to them. And it's not just a long life, and it's not just a life with fancy things, but it's a life with the truly finer things of life: joy, relationship, a bright future, and hope. Unbounded, authentic freedom. This is what this commandment offers us. So much more than first meets the eye. And when we look at what we can do and start within our families, we look at the hopes and dreams that we have for our children and our grandchildren. What are our dreams for our children's education in life? What are our hopes for their marriages and their careers and for the families that they will raise and the grandchildren that they will bless you with? How about their legacy? What are our hopes for their legacy? And these are all the earthly things, but even greater than all of this is heaven. Complete freedom, complete joy in heaven with God. Isn't that what we ultimately want for our children? When we obey this commandment, when we follow it, and all of the commandments collectively, we will truly be blessed. Just like Abraham was blessed. And we read about this in Genesis chapter 22, where God tells Abraham, he says, I will bless you and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the gates of their enemies, and in your descendants all the nations of the earth will find blessing, because you obeyed my command. So as we adopt and embrace these commandments, our children, our descendants will be blessed. And just as Abraham was blessed and all the nations were blessed because he followed the commandments, our descendants will be blessed as we embrace and live these commandments. It's a promise from God. The relationships within the family, specifically the relationships between a father and his children and a mother and her children, are paramount within the success of the future of children. The Journal of Family tells us adolescents who had a positive relationship with their fathers are less likely to be arrested, belong to a gang, damage property, steal, or run away compared to their peers with less positive relationships with their fathers. Statistically, the numbers are astounding. How much better off the futures are of children who have that loving relationship of honor and respect with their children. And an article called The Real Root Causes of Violent Crime talks about the mother's relationship with the child and the importance of that relationship. And it says in that article, the mother's strong affectionate attachment to her child is the child's best buffer against a life of crime. So how do we establish these relationships of love and affection? Well, there's many, many books that have written on it, but just to point out a few things that maybe will be important for us to consider today. Starting with the Fourth Commandment of teaching honor and respect and living it out within the home, lovingly disciplining our children. Society sometimes seems to say we shouldn't be disciplining our children, that'll hurt their self-esteem. Children need to be disciplined properly and lovingly. They need to know what the consequences are. And they need to feel those consequences when they don't follow. But it needs to be done lovingly and well. We need to listen to our children, because sometimes what we perceive they should be thinking isn't what they're thinking. We need to stop and listen to them sometimes, because they may perceive something and probably do perceive something very different than we do. We need to set clear expectations so they know ahead of time what the consequences are. And then we need to follow through with those. And then we need to be the example. We need to show that even when it hurts us to do the right thing, it seems to hurt us to do the right thing, we do it anyhow, because that's the way that the commandments call us to live. And they see us making the right choice maybe when nobody else is looking. The best blessing and promise of the Fourth Commandment isn't about what we see in our world today, and it isn't about their future and their careers and their marriages and their houses. It's about where it leads them ultimately. Our time here on earth is very short, but our time in hopefully heaven is so much greater. And what kind of future do we want for our children after this life? Do we want one that will lead them to complete joy and happiness, or to never find it throughout all of eternity? It starts with these commandments. It starts with this honor and respect in the home. This commandment has so much to offer us than what first meets the eye. When we take the first commandment and put God first in our lives, and we live this out and establish within the home a love for Jesus, putting Him first in our lives, making sure we attend Mass on Sunday and make the liturgy the centerpiece of our day, living out our lives with Christ front and center in our lives. Our children, those beautiful bright eyes, as they grow up, they see us loving this loving, wonderful God. and it draws them into a relationship with God themselves. Learning these commandments and obeying them and teaching them to our children draws them as they understand the richness and fullness of them and stop looking at them as a negative list of rules, but the greatness that each of these commandments calls us into. They see this and they're drawn into a relationship with God and into heaven. And as they see us living authentic Christian lives, these commandments tell us how to do this. It's why it's so important that we get them top of mind so we can live them within our hearts. And our children and grandchildren can see this, and they can see the joy that we experience when we do. Because our children look to us. They want to see what we're doing, and they want to emulate what we're doing, especially the young children. They do things that their parents are doing. They act them out. They put on their mom and dad's shoes and tromp around the house trying to be like dad, put mom and dad's coat on. They want to grow in to be like mom, and they want to be like dad. Children learn more from who you are than what you teach. So we have to walk the talk, do the actions behind these commandments. And it sure helps to understand what these commandments are really calling us to, the greatness that they have to offer in each of them. A parent's responsibility to their child in setting the example is extremely important. And it says so in our catechism. In paragraph 22-23, it says parents don't just have a responsibility, but it says parents have a grave responsibility to give good example to their children. Not to be taken lightly. What a great responsibility, but what a great privilege it is, as parents have the most important job in the world to establish the future, not for the children, but for all of society. We're going to take a look here at the relationship that we have with our children throughout our lives. And basically, there's three different stages of the parent-child relationship. The dependent stage, where the child is dependent upon the parent. The independence, when the child starts to become their own person. And then when roles are reversed. So first, we're going to look at the dependent stage here. This is a very important stage because this is when parents have the most influence, practically speaking and spiritually speaking, on a young child. Those big, beautiful, bright eyes as we shape and mold their attitudes about God and about one another, of honoring and respect. And then they're watching us. Every minute of the day, the kids are watching us to see what our actions are like. And they're putting the pieces together and connecting the dots. So we need to make sure we lead by the proper example of honor and respect ourselves. We need to be intentional about teaching the Catholic faith. We need to be careful not to abdicate the teaching of our faith to someone else, the teachers at school or the pastors or the Sunday school teachers. We need to be actively involved in teaching our children our faith and explaining to them why God is so important to ourselves. And we can make use of tremendous resources that are available that weren't available all that long ago. Parents need to listen again. We need to make sure that we're not assuming we know what our children are thinking. We need to listen to them and then guide them into making good decisions themselves. Sometimes we have to kind of step in if they're really going to step off a deep cliff there. But we need to try and guide them into making the right decisions. Now, this whole time I've been talking about what us as adults need to do regarding this commandment. You thought this commandment was about the children sitting up straight and listening and obeying. And we've spent all of this time talking about what we need to do so that our children can benefit from this commandment. Now I have one line that I'm going to say that the children need to sit up straight and listen. And this is where children need to just respond respectfully. They're often not going to like what we've told them, what we've said that they need to do, either as a consequence or as a general rule. But children need to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. They need to respond respectfully and not roll their eyes and say, whatever. This is where the children need to just say, I'm going to do this because it's one of the commandments, and I'm going to respect my mother and father even if I disagree and think that they're old-fashioned. God calls children to honor their mother and father. And then if we've done our job well and done it right, we don't need to depend upon our position of authority as a trump card and just say, well, the commandment says you have to listen to me, and that's it. Now, there are times when you've explained it over and over to the children, and they just don't want to get it, or they aren't getting it, and finally you just have to say, because I said so. And that's where they need to fall back to say, children need to respond respectfully. And when they know that you're an honorable person and you respect them, and you say, you know, I can't explain it any more than this, you're just going to have to trust me on this, they will. They may not like it, but they will. The next stage in our relationship with our children is the independent stage, and this is where our children are starting to break away and become their own person in the adolescent years and into early adulthood. And we need to have mutual honor and respect here and allow them to make some mistakes and decisions of their own and learn from them during this time. It's where maybe you're not quite peers, but closer to being peers with one another and giving them that latitude. But is our job over? I don't think so. I think we need to continue, and it's very important in this stage, to continue to set the example, to be that person who puts God first in our lives and pursues a deeper prayer life. As our children don't need as much time for us, we can commit more time to our relationship with God and have our relationship with God change in its dynamics as well. And as our children see this, they see that example and they see what's important in our lives. When they see us learning these commandments and observing them and putting them into practice, into teaching the grandchildren, they observe this and they see our example. And they see our example of continuing to pursue our faith and our relationship and our love for God. And then during this phase of independence, we need to depend on prayer a heck of a lot more as time goes on. We need to pray for patience, pray for good things in their lives. And then we need to pray that every once in a while they'll still ask for advice from us, to be able to impart some of the wisdom that God has shared with us in our experiences. And then the last phase, this is when roles are reversed. And this is where our children are providing care for the parents. This is a very important part of our relationship, and part of this commandment is providing for the older parents when they need some extra help. And we're called to do this. This is a responsibility. In Catechism 2208, it tells us the family should live in such a way that its members learn to care and take responsibility for the young, the old, the sick, the handicapped, and the poor. Our children and grandchildren need to learn how to care for their aging parents and grandparents. And this is where the blessing comes in here. So they, in turn, will have children who will care for them. What great wisdom God has in this commandment to prepare our children to be cared for in their old age by our grandchildren, by setting the example, by taking this responsibility and caring for our aging parents. What great blessing it is to care for our parents, because it teaches the grandchildren to love even when it's not easy to love. Another blessing is that it teaches our children to care for us as we did to our parents. I look to when my mother and father and my aunts and uncles were taking care of my grandfather and grandmother for many years. And it set the example for us of how they worked together and took care of Grandma and Grandpa. And when it came time for my mother to need a lot of extra help, we all came together and did the same. Now, this time with our parents, the 5 years that my siblings and I came together and took care of my mother, Yeah, there was tremendous sacrifice. Love never comes without great sacrifice. So while there was great sacrifice, I would never trade the time that I had with my mother. We shared so many laughs during those years. We cried together. We prayed together. We played silly little games and just sat and held each other's hands. I wouldn't have had that time if I hadn't taken the time to make that sacrifice to care for my brothers. And my sisters and my brother did the same, and they had the same blessing in their life, those memories that we wouldn't have had. Such blessing in caring for our parents. But also there's some time for some great healing. An opportunity for healing when we spend that time with mom and dad. Sometimes there's baggage that's been carried along for years and years that is able to be healed during that time. In the last weeks of my father-in-law's life, my wife went out to Colorado and spent time taking care of him. They had some great heart-to-heart talks, and there was some deep pain that had been carried for many years that they were able to heal. And so for the rest of my wife's life, she's able to release all of that pain and that anger through that time with her father. Don't miss out on the opportunity to care for your aging parents and grandparents. So many tremendous blessings to be had. And it truly is a responsibility and a duty. And we're told this in Timothy, first book of Timothy, where Paul tells us, "But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let these first learn to perform their religious duty to their own family and to make recompense to their parents, for this is pleasing to God." Taking care of a parent who maybe doesn't feel good and doesn't respond well and gets angry and doesn't like the way that you do things, it can get very, very difficult. And you may just say at some point, "I can't do this anymore." Maybe the baggage is there that doesn't help. When we get to that point, we can say, I can't do this for mom and dad right now, but I can do it for Jesus. Because I know that it pleases Jesus when we take this responsibility and make the sacrifice of love to care for them. One more point I want to make here before we get into our group discussions is that there are appropriate times when a child needs to disobey a person of authority. There are times when we need to give them permission to say no and disobey. When someone asks a child to do something that is contrary to one of the commandments, they need to have the permission to say, And they need to be able to recognize this. And this doesn't happen with a single conversation. It happens with multiple conversations, pointing out examples in television shows, in real-life news stories, in the drama that happens at school or at work or within the family. And be able to point out to say, here's an example where the seventh commandment is being violated here. And even though this person of authority, a boss or a coach, has told you to do something, you can rightfully stand your ground and say, no, not going there with you. And the children need to have permission to do that. Otherwise, they may just fall into the trap of following along with obeying that person of responsibility. So I need to make sure that we point that out. It's a very critical part of this. So our action plan for this week is take some time to assess who in your life that you owe respect to, and who in your life owes you respect. Look at those levels, the level of respect in those relationships, and if it's not where you think it should be, ask yourself why not and what changes need to happen to get those levels of honor and respect to the appropriate levels. And as a family activity, play the childhood game of Mother May I. It's always fun to play the mother, isn't it, when you're playing Mother May I. But play that game and have the conversation with your children as to why this commandment is important for them and how it sets them up for a good future, so that they can see the reality of this commandment playing out in their lives. And how this commandment, yes, it's a commandment for them to obey, but it's so much more. It has so much to offer them in their future. Next time we'll get into the fifth commandment, you shall not kill. Now, most of us, I'm sure probably nearly all of us, if not all of us, are saying, I don't kill. Well, I think we need to take a closer look at this, because while we may not directly kill, there may be some ways that we're indirectly killing, figuratively and literally. And we need to realize that killing is not necessarily just physical killing. We can kill in other ways when we kill somebody's spirit and their enthusiasm. So we need to be aware of those. Before we break into our group discussion here, we're going to go ahead and have our closing prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Creator of the universe and Redeemer of our souls, give us your grace to grow in your commandments each day, and your mercy when we stumble. You are the Lord our God. We will not have other gods before you. We will not use your name in vain, but will glorify your name in all our words and actions. We will remember to keep holy the Lord's Day by preserving it only for worshiping in you, resting in you, and for relationship with family and friends. We will honor our father and mother and teach our children to do the same. We will not kill, but will honor and protect life from conception to natural death. We will not commit adultery, but will honor our bodies for the sacred purpose of new life. We will not steal, but instead cultivate a heart of generosity. We will not lie, but rather honor truth in our words and actions. And we will not covet our neighbor's spouse, and we will not covet the things of this world, but rather we will set our heart on building treasures in heaven. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. All right, questions number 3 and 4 in your workbook for your group discussions there. The first question is, how should parents and grandparents be both the example and intentional in teaching the fourth commandment to our children and grandchildren? And the fourth question, what's the most important lesson you learned today that you need to teach your children and grandchildren? So let's go ahead and break into our groups and have our group discussion, and look forward to seeing you next time.